Welcome back, MC Time Trackers. Today, we're embarking on a dual mission. This isn't just a video about history. It's a dedicated English lesson where the past becomes your best teacher. Every word I narrate, every moment we explore, carries the deep echoes of time, the struggles, the triumphs, and the voices that shaped our world. When you learn English through history, you're not just memorizing vocabulary, you're connecting with the soul of humanity itself. So, I invite you to do more than just listen. Immerse yourself. Turn off all distractions. Close your eyes for a moment to feel the words and the rhythm of the English language. Practice and internalize. Let the language guide you. Mimic the sound, accent, and cadence of my speech in your head. Listen not only for information, but to master the sound of great English. If you can't finish this historical journey today, don't worry. The past will always be here, waiting for your return. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story. The story of India, from the beginning. In the 16th century, European ships began to sail across the seas toward the Indian subcontinent. They came chasing riches, first seizing trade routes, then the land itself. By the 1800s, the British would control most of the subcontinent, exploiting India's wealth and ruling it as the crown jewel of their empire. Yet long before the Europeans arrived, there were already thriving peoples here, with civilizations and history stretching back thousands of years. These ancient empires were among the most powerful the world had ever seen. From humanity's most magnificent cities and monuments to some of the most peaceful and enlightened cultures in human history, the Indians were pioneers of knowledge advancing mathematics, charting the movements of the planets, and offering the world unique philosophies. India withstood the ancient era, the Middle Ages, and now the modern period. With a rising population of over 1.4 billion people, India is a nation of immense challenges and opportunities. To understand this fascinating land, we must return to where it all began, the earliest people and the Indus Valley civilization. For many scholars, the story of India begins with the Adivasi, the ancient native peoples who had lived on the subcontinent for anywhere up to 30,000 years. These tribes inhabited India as nomads and semi-nomads long before anyone else. They left behind very little archaeological evidence, and the history that survived did so orally, passed down through their modern descendants. The Indus Valley Civilization, c. 3300 BC, 1300 BC. Then came the first major settled civilization in India, the Indus River Valley Civilization. It emerged in the late 4th millennium BC along the Indus River, becoming one of the first great urban societies on the planet. Despite existing concurrently with Mesopotamia, Egypt, and China, comparatively little is known about them. The Indus Valley Civilization was an urban culture that thrived along the river for about 2,000 years, reaching its height around 2600 BC and declining after 1900 BC. At one point, it might have been home to up to 5 million people living in hundreds of cities and towns. Excavations at major sites like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, both in modern-day Pakistan, show a complex urban culture with stone architecture and planned cities. The infrastructure was astonishing. They relied on monsoon agriculture, and had sewage systems and public baths that would not be matched elsewhere in the world for over 1,000 years. Evidence also shows a developed merchant culture using seals and documents for trade, along with settlement walls to control entry and exit. From their graves, we know they believed in some sort of afterlife, and differences between the burials suggest a wealth-based social hierarchy. However, we still cannot decipher their writing. As a result, although we can point to hundreds of sites, much of their lives and society is lost to us. We cannot even name a single person from this civilization's 2,000-year history. The decline. The Indus Valley civilization didn't fall at a single decisive moment. It appears to have gradually declined between about 1900 BC and 1300 BC. The most likely explanation is climate change. After 1800 BC, the climate of the Indus region became cooler and drier, which affected the monsoons and made it harder to practice the agriculture needed for large cities. Earthquakes also caused the course of the Indus River to shift westward over time, depriving cities of their vital water source. The cities declined, but the Indus people themselves didn't vanish. Most scholars believe they migrated southeast, deeper into the subcontinent. One theory holds that the Dravidian language family, including Telugu, Tamil, and Kannada, spoken mostly in South India, originally came from these Indus Valley migrants. The Vedic period and the birth of the caste system. With the decline of the Indus Valley civilization, a new group of people entered the story. The Vedic peoples. It is these people that many modern Indians see as their ancient predecessors. The Indo-Aryans. The Vedic people appear to have hailed from Central Asia and began migrating into northwestern India in around 1500 BC. They called themselves Arya nobly and are sometimes called the Indo-Aryans. Initially, nomadic pastoralists, they gradually settled in India, in villages and small towns. By 1200 BC, they had crossed the Ganges River, penetrating deeper into central and eastern India. The Vedic people brought the domestication of the horse to India, using them as pack animals, and to pull the chariots characteristic of Vedic warfare. They also brought their own language, Vedic Sanskrit. The Vedas are a collection of dense, complicated, and beloved religious texts that are still in use today. There are 4 Vedas. The oldest and most well-known is the Rig Veda, along with the Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda. Composed around 1500 BC, these texts form the foundation of Indian philosophy, ritual, and spiritual thought. Society and Varna. Vedic people began as semi-nomadic tribal pastoralists, concentrating first in the Punjab before gradually settling in agricultural communities along the Ganges and Yamuna rivers. The arrival of ironworking in India after 1200 BC enabled them to tame the thick forests and jungles and encouraged more permanent, though small, settlements. As Vedic society developed, its social structure changed. Eventually, a new social structure emerged, dubbed Varna color, class, also known as the caste system. The Purusha Sukta of the Rig Veda describes the Varna system in terms of the body. Brahman, the head, the priestly class, responsible for studying and educating on religious texts. Kshatriya, the warrior class, including kings, nobles, and administrators, essentially anyone who ruled or exercised power. Vaishya, the thighs, landowning farmers, animal husbandmen, merchants, and businessmen. Shudra, the feet, laborers or peasants, whose job was generally to serve the other three varnas. Further south, the Deccan Plateau saw its own array of cultures, such as the Jorwe culture in modern-day Maharashtra, which lasted for some 700 years, 1,400–700 BC, and left behind strange archaeological puzzles, like the fascination with cutting off feet before burial. Though less known, these people are every bit a part of the history of India as the Vedic peoples they lived alongside. The Mahajanapadas and spiritual revolution. The Vedic period ran for about 1,000 years, ending around the 6th or 7th centuries BC. This period was marked by the emergence of new cities, the formation of early states called Janapadas, which were then consolidated into 16 larger Mahajanapadas, kingdoms or minor empires. Notable ones included Kuru, Vaji, and Magadha. These cities provided a place for new intellectual, cultural, and spiritual developments that would transform India. Jainism and the ideal of ahimsa. Jainism emerged in the 6th century BC due to the actions of the ascetic monk Mahavira, a prince in eastern India. Mahavira left his luxurious life at age 30, and after 12 years of meditation, achieved jnana, transcendence. In doing so, he became a Tirthankara, one who created a way to transcend samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Jainism calls for its followers to obey 5 important vows, including never stealing, practicing chastity, avoiding greed, and, most famously, practicing total nonviolence ahimsa, symbolized by the open palm. Jainism's ideas, especially ahimsa, have profoundly shaped Indian history ever since. Buddhism and the Middle Path. The second major religious development was Buddhism. Its founder, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, was a prince of the Shakya clan. According to tradition, his sheltered life was shattered when he first left the palace and witnessed old age, sickness, and death, making him realize that suffering was inevitable in life. Siddhartha became an ascetic and, after attempting various methods, sat underneath a Bodhi tree in modern-day Bihar and meditated for 49 days. By doing so, he achieved nirvana, the complete elimination of desire that untethered him from samsara. The foundation of the Buddhist religion lies in the 4 noble truths. There is suffering. This suffering has a cause, desire. This suffering has an end. The way to reach that end is the Eightfold Path. The Buddha called for his followers to walk the middle path between extreme indulgence and extreme restraint, a more reasonable approach for the average person. Sharing concepts like karma and reincarnation with Jain and Hindu beliefs, Buddhism spread widely. Although it would eventually migrate out of the subcontinent and almost die in its birthplace, it remains highly respected in India. The rise of Magadha. Of the 16 Mahajanapadas, Magadha became the cradle of India's first great empires. The region was ideally suited for empire building. Rice agriculture was highly productive, creating large food surpluses for non-farming occupations and a stable tax base. The region had good access to iron for tools and weaponry. It was home to elephants, a prominent feature of Indian warfare. The Haryanka dynasty was started by King Bimbisara in 454 BC. Bimbisara was a wise king and a great supporter of the Buddha. However, his life ended tragically around 493 BC when he was assassinated by his own son Ajatashatru for the throne. Ajatashatru later regretted his actions, became a follower of the Buddha, and sought redemption while conquering Vaishali, Kasi, and Kosala, expanding the dynasty. After the Haryanka dynasty, the Shishanaga dynasty rose, only to be overthrown in 345 BC by the short-lived Nanda dynasty, which controlled a vast empire in the east. Alexander, Chandragupta, and the Mauryan Empire. The Nanda Empire clung on just long enough to see the arrival of an outsider, Alexander the Great. Alexander's invasion, 326 BC. Alexander the Great entered the Punjab in 326 BC after conquering the Persian Empire. He met the Indian king identified in Greek sources as Porus at the Jhelum River, known as the Hydaspes. In the resulting battle, Alexander's forces proved superior, encircling and slaughtering most of Porus's army. Impressed by Porus's fighting spirit, Alexander allowed him to remain in power as a cooperator. Later that year, Alexander's conquest stopped at the Bias River, Hyphasis. His exhausted army, hearing stories of the vast and powerful Nanda Empire awaiting them in the east, with 200,000 men and thousands of war elephants, forced the conqueror to turn back and leave India. Chandragupta Maurya, c. 320 BC. In 320 BC, the Nanda Empire was overthrown by an ambitious man named Chandragupta Maurya. With the help of his advisor Chanakya, or Kautilya, Chandragupta rapidly seized power and began pushing his new Mauryan Empire west. He seized control of the areas once held by Alexander, leading to a conflict with the Seleucid Empire, the largest of Alexander's successors. Chandragupta won, taking all of Alexander's conquered territory in the Indus Valley and into Afghanistan. In exchange, he gave 500 war elephants to his Greek foes, and likely married the daughter of Emperor Seleucus I, Nicator. The Seleucid ambassador, Megasthenes, visited Chandragupta's capital at Pataliputra, describing the grand city as being surrounded by 21 miles of walls with almost 600 towers and 60 gates. By the end of the reign of Chandragupta and his son Bindusara, the Mauryan Empire pushed its borders to almost the entirety of India. By doing so, the Mauryan Empire became the first state to unify most of India under a single power. The only regions unconquered were Kalinga and some parts of the far south. Ashoka the Great and the path to peace. The Mauryan Empire reached its zenith under Ashoka the Great, RAR 268-232 BC, grandson of Chandragupta. Ashoka initially wielded the empire's military might, notably leading a campaign against the state of Kalinga in the east that reputedly caused 250,000 deaths. Witnessing this destruction profoundly changed Ashoka. Horrified by the bloodshed and his role in it, he swore off war altogether after 261 BC and dedicated himself absolutely to Buddhism and the ideals of nonviolence. This conversion ended the Mauryan conquest phase. Ashoka spent the remainder of his reign atoning for his past violence, working as a devout Buddhist ruler. His edicts, inscribed on pillars and rocks across the empire, serve as a primary source, confessing his past sins and outlining his efforts to provide for his people. He established hospitals and wells, planted banyan trees along the roads for shade, and patronized Buddhist sites, including making a pilgrimage to the Bodhi tree and ordering the construction of the first temples where the Mahabodhi temple now stands. Ashoka is revered for not only being an effective ruler, but also a man who recognized his mistakes and devoted his life to correcting them. The succession proved complicated. Ashoka's first son became a monk. His second son, Prince Kunala, was blinded by the jealous Queen Tisharaka through a forged royal order, disqualifying him. Following Ashoka's death in 232 BC, the throne passed briefly to his grandson, Dasharatha Maurya, then to Kunala's son, Samprati. However, the empire, weakened by its immense size and the non-violence policy, rapidly declined. Around 185 BC, the last Mauryan emperor was assassinated by his general, Pushyamitra Shunga, who founded the Shunga Empire. Unified rule over most of India was lost for centuries. Fragmentation and foreign incursions. 185 BC, 320 CE. The 500 years following the Mauryan collapse is often labeled a dark age, characterized by a sparse historical record, political fragmentation, and constant foreign incursions. Shunga and Kanva dynasties. The Shunga Empire, established by Pushyamitra Shunga in Magadha, ruled for 36 years, before rapidly disintegrating after the death of the second king, Agnimitra. This decline was fueled by internal conflicts and wars against the Kalinga, the Panchulas, and the Indo-Greek kingdom after Greek king Demetrius invaded from the Kabul Valley. The dynasty, which saw 10 rulers, ended in 73 BC when the last emperor, Devabhuti, was assassinated by his minister Vasudeva Kanva, who established the short-lived Kanva dynasty, 7328 BC. Northern invaders and the Kushan Empire. Waves of invaders struck northern India. Greeks from Bactria conquered much of the north and briefly sacked the old Mauryan capital, Pataliputra. Scythians, Sakas, invaded northwestern India. The Uzhug, another Central Asian group, conquered the Sakas and, led by Kujula Kadphises, c. 25 AD, founded the Kushan Empire. The Kushan kingdom dominated modern-day Pakistan, Punjab, and Afghanistan. Despite their foreign origins, their emperors became patrons of Indian culture, eventually converting to Hinduism and Buddhism. They grew immensely wealthy from the Indian Ocean trade. The Kushan Empire was likely the first major Indian state to confront a Chinese army on the battlefield, when Emperor Kanishka's forces met General Ban Chao in Central Asia. Kanishka was reportedly defeated and forced to pay tribute. The Deccan, the Satavahana dynasty. Elsewhere, particularly in the Deccan, this period was one of prosperity. The Satavahana dynasty, c. 1st century BC, 3rd century CE, ruled a large swathe of central India for about 400 years, 30 kings. Under its peak ruler, Gautamiputra Satakarni, the dynasty cleared the Sakas from southwest India and controlled the world's most important ports, including Bharuch, Kalyan, and Shoraraka, facilitating a thriving international trade in luxury goods, silk, and spices. Flourishing global trade. The Satavahanas could muster an army of 100,000 men, a detail noted by Roman author Pliny. Roman interest was high. Geographer Strabo recorded over 100 Roman ships heading to India annually around the turn of the millennium. Coins of Roman emperors like Trajan and Marcus Aurelius have been found across India, confirming the trade of pepper, pearls, and other treasures. India's connectivity also extended east to China, not only via Central Asian trade routes, but also through Buddhist monks who traveled and brought the faith to China during these centuries. Finds of Indian pottery, textiles, and coins in Southeast Asia, from Malaysia to Thailand, attest to India's role as a major intermediary and trade partner. Southern India, Tamilakam. Southern India, known as Tamilakam, land of the Tamils, encompassing modern Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and parts of Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, experienced significant cultural and political growth. Tamil culture remained distinct from the north. Sangam literature, 3rd century BC, 3rd century CE, focusing on romance and war, offers a glimpse into society. The Varna caste system was not yet widely practiced in the south. New religious concepts like Ananku, a magical force, spirit attached to objects, people, were present. Gender relations were different, with women being more visible and having diverse jobs, including serving as female bodyguards for kings. However, Sangam texts also reference social hierarchies, including groups whose presence was considered polluting, reflecting nascent concepts of untouchability. Politically, Tamilakam was dominated by the Muvantar, 3 crowned rulers, the Cheras, Cholas, and Pandyas. These dynasties would vie for power for the next 1,000 years. The Pandyas were most dominant in this early period, maintaining their position long after the Mauryans were gone and establishing their capital, Madurai, as the epicenter of Sangam scholarship. The Deccan, the Vakatakas, and cave art. After the Satavahanas, the Deccan came under the rule of the Vakatakas, c. 3rd to 6th century. This was a traditionalist dynasty whose rulers, like Pravarsana I, performed ancient Vedic rituals, such as the Ashvamedha horse sacrifice multiple times, to legitimize their kingship. The most famous legacy of the Vakatakas are the Ajanta caves, a collection of 30 Buddhist cave monuments carved into a cliff in modern Maharashtra. The Vakatakas sponsored the second major wave of construction, turning these sanctuaries and monasteries into magnificent showcases of ancient Mahayana Buddhist art. They also likely began work on the similarly impressive Ellora caves. The Vakatakas' power and importance eventually earned them marriage alliances with the rising power of classical India, the Guptas. The Gupta Golden Age, CE 320–550 CE. The Gupta Empire emerged in the early 4th century, extending control over the majority of northern and eastern India. The third ruler, Chandragupta I, no relation to the Mauryan, took the imperial title Maharajadhiraja, King of Great Kings. The Guptas established a successful model of imperial power. Emperors maintained direct control over core regions while allowing regional rulers significant freedom, provided they swore loyalty and paid tribute. This decentralized approach was highly effective for ruling a vast and diverse land. His son Samudragupta expanded the empire further, conquering the ancient Magadhan capital of Pataliputra and subduing a long list of kings. Later rulers like Chandragupta II continued these conquests, finally defeating the Saka Scythians and driving them out of northwest India. Though the Guptas never controlled the Deccan or southern India, they maintained strong marriage alliances with the Vakatakas, and even rulers as far as Sri Lanka acknowledged them as the supreme regional power. The Gupta period is universally nicknamed the Golden Age of India due to its peace, stability, prosperity, and unparalleled innovation in religion, art, and science. Science and education. Nalanda University, a Buddhist Mahavihara founded by the Guptas in Bihar, became one of the world's greatest centers of learning, patronized by both Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Scholars specialized in Mahayana Buddhism, for example, Dignaga's foundational work on Buddhist logic, the Vedas, medicine, and astronomy. Aryabhata, 5th–6th centuries, a brilliant mathematician and astronomer, is known for the Aryabhatiya, in which he correctly deduced the nature of eclipses and the Earth's rotation. He was one of the first to correctly approximate pi dollar to 3.1416, and may have been the first to deduce that pi dollar was an irrational number. He is also credited with discovering the sine and cosine functions, which reached Europe via Arabic translations of his work. Varahamihura is the earliest datable scholar to represent zero as a symbol and a number, though the concept of zero originated earlier in India. The revival of Hinduism and great epics. The Guptas were the first major empire in history with Hinduism as their main religion. This period marked a golden age for the faith. Rulers promoted Sanskrit learning, codified sacred texts, and constructed the first grand stone temples. Hinduism's most important deities form the Trimurti, cosmic forces of creation, preservation, and destruction. Brahma, creation. Vishnu, preservation. By far the most popular, often depicted as blue-skinned with 4 arms. He takes the form of avatars, like Krishna, to maintain cosmic order. Shiva, destruction. Seen as a necessary and integral part of the cycle of creation and preservation. Crucially, the great epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, reached their recognizable modern forms during the Gupta period. These stories, which are several times longer than the combined works of Homer and the Bible, Quran, recount the epic Kurukshetra war between the Kauravas and the Pandavas. They remain essential cultural ties shared by all of India. Social life and the status of women. The benefits of the Golden Age extended to the common people. The Chinese monk, Faxian c. 415 CE, recorded that noble families established charity houses and hospitals where the poor, sick, and disabled received free medical treatment, food, and medicine. However, this prosperity was tempered by a decline in the status and freedom of women. Women's rights diminished. They were restricted from studying the Vedas, and the belief emerged that women could only achieve liberation after being reborn into a male body. The custom of sati, widow burning, though existing conceptually earlier, became more common and normalized during this period. The Kama Sutra, a manual on relationships, courtship, and lovemaking, was written. While famous today for its sections on sex, most of the text addresses social expectations and domestic duties. It reinforces the image of wives as obedient servants who manage the household's finances and servants, while demanding strict chastity from widows, reflecting the more controlled role of women that had emerged. Fun ban ne bao gom kak chude quan trong tu supto kudeche. Gupta. Thirki fan man sao do bao gom kak vung quok ho Gupta. Nu pushiabuti va shalukya. Kuk doi do tien ju wa an do va hoi jiao. Va su trowe de. Suitan ku kak de she. Hoi jiao do tien mien bak. Sultanate Delhi. Va mien nam. Bamani. Kungvai de she. Hindu Vijayanagara. Toi da tum tat fanai sung gong quang 1,700 tun su. Jiu lai de du chi tiet lit su. Du lio quan trong. Va du tri tin yet quan ve fong ka hok tuat da tiet lup. Du de lavem ban dom tat va hop nyot deep noi le mach fun da huan tan truk do. The collapse of the Gupta Empire. The decline of the Gupta Empire was a protracted process, not a singular event. Shifting social orders strained the centuries-old structure, and the empire's decentralized strength ultimately became its weakness as powerful regional rulers began breaking away in the late 5th century. Meanwhile, foreign invaders, particularly the Huns, severely sapped the empire's resources, chipping away at weakly held regions. Waves of intense invasions in the early 6th century allowed the Huns to overrun much of the subcontinent. Although the combined efforts of the remaining Gupta forces and other Indian kingdoms eventually drove them back, the Guptas never recovered their lost territory or power. The last known Gupta emperor ruled in the 542s, after which the dynasty vanished, bringing the golden age of art, literature, and stable trade to an end. India once again entered a period of intense regional fragmentation and warfare. Post-Gupta kingdoms. 6th, 8th centuries. The immediate post-Gupta era saw the rise of new kingdoms, notably the Pushyabhuti in the north and the Chalukya in the Deccan. Harsha's empire, Pushyabhuti. The Pushyabhuti dynasty established itself in the Punjab. Its most significant ruler was Harsha, r. 606-647, who came to power at just 16, after the betrayal and murder of his elder brother. Harsha subdued kingdoms from Punjab to central India, proving himself a talented military leader and an even more adept peaceful governor. Harsha was an itinerant emperor, preferring to travel his kingdom to listen to his subjects and resolve regional issues hands-on. He was tolerant of both Hindus and Buddhists, patronizing Brahmins and monks alike. A polymath, he was also said to have written at least 3 plays and was a talented lute player. Our knowledge of his reign comes primarily from 2 sources. Banabhata, Harsha's official biographer, who penned India's oldest surviving biography of a royal patron. Xuanzang Xuanzang, the famous Chinese Buddhist monk, whose travels were later mythologized in Journey to the West, who visited Harsha's court and praised his virtuous rule. Harsha also engaged in early formal diplomacy with China, sending an ambassador to the Tang emperor. However, he died without heirs in 647, causing his empire to collapse back into warring kingdoms. The Chalukya dynasty. The Deccan. The Chalukya Empire, ruling from Badami in the Deccan from the mid-6th century, emerged as Gupta power waned. Their reputation rests largely on Pulakeshin II, r. 610-642. Pulakeshin II seized his rightful throne after defeating his uncle Mangalesha in a civil war. He suppressed rebellions and conquered numerous kingdoms. notably defeating King Harsha himself at the Battle of Narmada, 619. His most historic defensive victory occurred when his navy successfully repelled an Arab navy sent under the authority of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab to capture the city of Tana near Mumbai. Pulakeshin's reign ended when he was defeated and slain by the Pallava king Narasimhavarman I during a series of battles, 630 seconds, 640 seconds, leading to the capture of the Chalukya capital, Vatapi. The Chalukyas eventually recaptured their capital, but were themselves overthrown by one of their vassals, the Rashtrakutas, in 753. The first encounter with Islam. Pulakeshin II's battle with the Caliph's forces marked the first major encounter between Islamic and Indian powers. The story of Islam in India, however, is not purely one of conflict, but also of trade and tolerance. Islam burst onto the scene in the early 7th century, swiftly establishing control from North Africa to Persia, putting the Umayyad Caliphate on the border of Indian kingdoms in modern Afghanistan and Pakistan. The conquest of Sindh, 712. Arab naval expeditions targeted India as early as 636, but land invasions proved more successful. The pivotal conquest was Sindh, modern-day Pakistan, which was under the control of the Brahmin dynasty. Following decades of raids, an Umayyad army finally conquered the region in 712, placing Sindh under Muslim control. This event is a foundational moment for many Pakistanis. Over the following centuries, the region's population largely adopted Islam, tolerance, and trade. Despite military conflict, early interactions were often defined by cooperation. Arab traders were welcomed into Indian ports, and rulers were generally tolerant. The Rashtrakutas, who controlled the western coast, permitted Muslim communities to settle in their cities and establish mosques. Arab travelers' writings from this period are crucial sources of information. Conversely, Sindh remained home to Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain communities for centuries under Muslim rule, and Indian ships were a common sight in Muslim ports. The tripartite struggle c. 750, 1000. In the vacuum left by the Guptas in northern India, three empires became locked in continuous conflict for control of the region and the historic city of Kannauj, a conflict known as the Tripartite Struggle or the Kannauj Triangle Wars. The Pratiharas, based in Gujarat and Rajasthan. They gained fame defending against Muslim incursions from Sindh. An Arab chronicler called Emperor Mihira Bhoja, no greater foe of Islam than he. The Rashtrakutas, the dominant power in the Deccan after overthrowing the Chalukyas. They were far more tolerant of Islam, permitting extensive trade and the settlement of Muslim communities, which earned them positive accounts from Arab travelers. Stretching from the Deccan to the north, they were the largest of the three. The Pallas, based in Bengal. They were the last major Buddhist imperial power in Indian history, renowned for diplomacy and scholarship. The Pallas maintained strong relations with Southeast Asia, the Arab world, and the Buddhist Tibetan Empire, attracting travelers and scholars. The struggle ended in the late 10th century with the fragmentation of the Pratiharas and Rashtrakutas. The Pallas proved more durable, lasting until the mid-12th century. The Chola Empire. The South. While the tripartite struggle raged in the north, the south saw the reassertion of the old Muventar, three crown rulers dynasties. It was the Chola's turn to dominate. The Chola Empire was founded by King Vijayalaya in the late 9th century, who rebelled against his Pallava overlords. Over the following centuries, the Cholas not only united more of southern India than any power before them, but also became one of the only Indian powers to build a foreign empire. Under Raja I, 985–1014, the Cholas conquered northern Sri Lanka and the Maldives. His son, Rajendra I, 1014–1044, achieved the greatest expansion, completing the conquest of Sri Lanka and then expanding east into the Malay archipelago, Sumatra, and Thailand. His campaigns in the north, including a victory in Bengal, earned him the title Gangai Kandachala, the Chola who conquered the Ganga. Chola maritime dominance. During the 11th and 12th centuries, the Cholas dominated Southeast Asia, turning the Bay of Bengal into what has been described as a Chola lake. This maritime dominance was supported by massive trade. Traders from China in the east to Egypt in the west flocked to Chola ports. Largest navy. Trade revenue funded a massive army, and the largest navy yet seen in India. Trading vessels were repurposed as warships. Road networks. Extensive road networks supported overland trade. This prosperity gave rise to a powerful merchant class and wealthy guilds, and Chola rulers used this wealth to fund new cities and monumental temples. The rise of Islamic sultanates in the north. As the medieval period progressed, Islamic powers began encroaching into India with greater intensity. Ghaznavid raids. The Muslim Ghaznavid Empire, marching out of Afghanistan, was one of the first. Its ruler, Mahmud of Ghazni, Rudder 998–1030, allegedly swore to wage jihad against India every year. He defeated the Hindu ruler of Kabul, captured Lahore in 1021, and raided deep into India until his death in 1030. Although his conquests were largely temporary, they demonstrated the vulnerability of the fractured Hindu kingdoms. The Ghurid conquest. The Ghurid Empire overthrew the Ghaznavids in 1186 and launched a full invasion under Muhammad of Ghor in 1191. Over the next decade, his forces conquered the Ganga Valley, reaching Lower Bengal by 1203. Upon Muhammad of Ghor's assassination in 1206, one of his generals and former slave, Qutb al-Din Aibak, established himself as a sultan, founding the Delhi Sultanate. The Delhi Sultanate, 1206–1526. The Delhi Sultanate lasted for 300 years and encompassed 5 separate dynasties, all sharing common factors: rule from Delhi, the Muslim faith, and claimed descent from outside of India. The Mamluk slave dynasty, 1206–1290. The first dynasty, the Mamluk, or slave dynasty, secured control over all of northern India, from Pakistan to Bengal. They spent much of their military and economic resources confronting the expanding Mongol Empire, which launched waves of raids throughout the latter half of the 13th century, though thankfully never a full invasion. The Khalji dynasty, 1290–1320. Court intrigue ended the Mamluks, leading to the brief but brutal Khalji dynasty. The most infamous ruler was Ala-ud-Din Khalji Rur, 1296–1000. 316, who was known for his tyranny and violence. He seized power by murdering his uncle, Jalal-ud-Din, and continued conquering and pillaging cities like Warangal and adding Gujarat to his empire. Alauddin was paranoid and harsh. He cracked down on Hindu temples and even massacred 30,000 Mongol Muslim converts. His death in 1316 led to a brutal civil war, ending when the victorious general, Ghayath al-Din Tughlaq, beheaded the remaining Khalji line and established his own dynasty. The Tughlaq dynasty and decline. The Tughlaq dynasty, 1321,414, heavily discriminated against Hindus and staffed top posts exclusively with Muslims, resulting in dozens of rebellions. The second Tughlaq ruler, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, launched a disastrous invasion of the Yuan dynasty in China, losing 100,000 men in the Himalayas, which contributed to economic collapse and famine. As the Tughlaqs declined in the mid-14th century, regions began to break away. The Bahmani Sultanate, formed by Muslim rulers in the northern Deccan. The Vijayanagara Empire, formed by Hindu nobles in the south. The rivalry of Bahmani and Vijayanagara. The Bahmani Sultanate, 1347–1527, was characterized by a Muslim aristocracy maintaining a tolerant policy toward the Hindu majority. They welcomed immigrants from the Muslim world, known as Westerners, as mercenaries and administrators. They were likely the first power to deploy gunpowder weapons on the subcontinent. The Vijayanagara Empire, 1336–1646, followed the older Hindu tradition of kingship. Both empires shared a border along the Krishna River and were locked in open warfare for much of their history, fighting 4 major wars and numerous skirmishes. The Bahmani generally won, forcing Vijayanagara to pay tribute several times. Key conflicts. In 1378, Vijayanagara seized upon the assassination of the Bahmani Sultan to invade and capture key ports, including Goa. The War of the Goldsmith's Daughter, 1406, saw the Vijayanagara ruler, Devaraya I, march his army north to forcibly marry a Muslim goldsmith's daughter who had rejected him. The Bahmani Sultan intervened, defeated Devaraya, and forced a humiliating treaty. Devaraya had to give one of his own daughters to the Sultan as a bride. Meanwhile, the Delhi Sultanate's decline continued, with the Tughlaq dynasty on its last legs when, in 1398, the infamous Mongol conqueror Timur Tamerlane arrived. De la fin tomtacho doam ven tuba tab trong vao, susubdo kuka kuang kwok, hoyao, adeli vadekan, su choi de kude che mugal, su shuat haeng kuka kuang kwok shao, ao, va su tan go mugal, kung voisu noilen go maratha va dausik. Toi da tom tat Zung Gong Kwang 1,500 Tansu, Julai Kak Chi Tiet Kwan Trong Yot. The final decline of sultanates and the Mughal arrival. The decline of the Delhi Sultanate was punctuated by tragedy. In 1398, the infamous Mongol conqueror Timur Tamerlane invaded and brutally sacked Delhi for 5 days, crippling the city for a century. The weakened Tughlaq dynasty collapsed shortly after, followed by the Sayyid, and then the Afghan Lodi dynasty, 1451, the fifth and final dynasty of the Sultanate. southern India also faced fragmentation. The Vijayanagara Empire, though enjoying a brief golden age under Devaraya II, controlling all of southern India, up to the Krishna River, and receiving tribute from Sri Lanka, was plagued by internal strife. The Bahmani Sultanate fared worse, facing near-perpetual rebellion from Hindu Rajput nobles, leading to its fracture into 5 separate kingdoms by 1525. The stage was set for foreign ambition. Blending Turk-Mongol warrior culture, Persian administration, and Islamic faith, the Mughals arrived from Central Asia in 1526. The Mughal Foundation, Babur, and Humayun. The Mughals, claiming direct descent from Genghis Khan and Timur, were destined to found one of India's greatest pre-modern empires. Babur Rar, 1526-1530, led his powerful army into India via Afghanistan, defeating the Lodi Sultanate at the Battle of Panipat, 1526, establishing Mughal rule over northern India. Babur was a scholar who appreciated India's landscape but largely isolated himself in Persian enclaves, showing little interest in the native population. The empire was initially short-lived. Following Babur's death, his son Humayun was driven out by the Pashtun Sher Shah Suri in 1540, fleeing to the Safavid Empire of Persia. With Safavid military aid, Humayun defeated his brothers, reclaimed their territory, and returned to India in 1555, crushing the Delhi Sultanate at the Battle of Sirhind. Tragically, he died just 6 months later after falling down his library stairs. Akbar the Great, the golden age of centralization and tolerance. Humayun's death ushered in the golden age of the Mughals under his young son, Akbar, 1556-1605. Akbar is often compared to Ashoka for his wisdom, tolerance, and virtue. Military innovation. Initially ruling under his regent, Bayram Khan, Akbar spent his early reign consolidating northern India. He was an innovator on the battlefield, making possibly the first major use of cannons in India against Rajput princes, 1569, making the Mughal military the first large force in India to rely heavily on gunpowder weapons. Political integration. Akbar secured peace with Hindu nobility through diplomacy, taking a Hindu wife and allowing Hindu nobles significant autonomy in managing their affairs while remaining loyal. Centralization and reform. Akbar was a great centralizer, establishing the administrative structures that sustained the empire for centuries. He was known for striving to balance his Muslim faith with the Hindu majority he ruled. He abolished the jizya tax levied on non-Muslims in 1564 and banned the forcing of widows to commit sati. Religious tolerance. Din-e-Ilahi. From 1575, Akbar held legendary religious debates featuring Hindus, Muslims, Jains, Christians, and Zoroastrians, showcasing his genuine interest in other faiths. He allowed Hindu temples to flourish and patronized scholars and artists, ensuring the Mughal period was one of significant cultural and scientific flourishing. Akbar died in 1605, leaving behind an empire that would endure for another 2.5 centuries. Powerful Mughal women and the Taj Mahal. The Mughal period also saw powerful women emerge in politics, Nur Jahan, wife of Emperor Jahangir, Akbar's son. Nur Jahan was a shrewd and capable politician who amassed significant power, holding the royal seal to pass decrees and making government appointments. She effectively wielded the true power alongside her husband. Mumtaz Mahal, wife of Shah Jahan, Jahangir's heir. Theirs was a famed love match. Shah Jahan reportedly took no other wives seriously during their 26-year marriage. They had 14 children. Mumtaz Mahal served as a trusted advisor and was granted power in court. She tragically died from birth complications in 1631. The Taj Mahal. Distraught by her death, Shah Jahan commissioned the magnificent mausoleum complex outside Agra. Built by architect Lahari, the Taj Mahal was largely completed by 1643 and stands as an enduring symbol of Mughal architecture, love, and India's past glory. The European arrival and the EIC foothold. Change was slowly creeping into India with the arrival of European newcomers, marking the end of nearly a millennium of minimal direct interaction. Portuguese arrival, 1498. Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa and reached Calicut, establishing the first direct European sea route to India. The Portuguese were granted permission to establish trade outposts, factories. India quickly became aware of Europe's technological and military advantages. The Portuguese defeated the Mamluk dynasty of Egypt at the Battle of Diu, 1509, and captured Goa from the Bijapur Sultanate in 1510, holding it for the next 450 years. Rivals emerge. Following a brief Spanish focus on the Americas, other European powers moved in. The Dutch established the Dutch East India Company, VOC, in 1596, focusing primarily on Indonesia, and the French followed in the mid-17th century. The British EIC, Jesuit missionary Thomas Stevens, was the first known Englishman to reach India, 1579. Queen Elizabeth I chartered the East India Company, EIC, on the 31st of December 1600, granting it a monopoly on British trade in South Asia. Captain William Hawkins arrived at Emperor Jahangir's court in 1608 as the first official envoy. Securing a base, the British shifted focus fully to the subcontinent after Dutch victories in Southeast Asia. A clash between English and Portuguese ships at the Battle of Swally in 1612 resulted in the first major British military victory in South Asia, persuading the Mughal Emperor Jahangir to allow the British to establish their first permanent base at Surat. By 1647, the British had 23 trading posts. The most important were Madras, 1639, Bombay, 1661, and Kolkata, 1690, which would serve as key cities in British-ruled India. For most of the 16th and 17th centuries, the European presence remained a lucrative side story for the Mughals, focused on trade rather than territorial conquest. The Mughal decline and the rise of new powers. The Mughal Empire reached its territorial height under Emperor Aurangzeb Rar, 1658–1707, but his reign simultaneously spelled the beginning of the empire's terminal decline due to emerging political and religious problems. The Maratha Challenge. Aurangzeb's attention was immediately consumed by the Deccan. While he dealt with Central Asian raids, Shivaji Bhonsle carved out the independent Maratha kingdom from Mughal vassal states in the Deccan, 1674. The Deccan Wars against the Marathas occupied most of Aurangzeb's military resources for 2 decades, even after he subdued them following Shivaji's death. Religious intolerance and resistance. From the 1672, Aurangzeb's famous tolerance evaporated. He adopted a hardline Islamic approach, reinstating the jizya tax, establishing the mutasibs, Islamic morality police, and ordering the demolition of several Hindu temples. This persecution permanently alienated many Hindus. His harshest persecution, however, fell upon the nascent religious group, the Sikhs. The Sikh Awakening. Sikhism, the world's youngest major religion, was founded by Guru Nanak, 1469–1539, in the Punjab. After a religious epiphany at age 30, he preached a holistic monotheistic creed, seeking to unify all people, famously stating, "There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim." Sikhism emphasizes the individual's direct relationship with God, duty, justice, and service, and warns against the 5 vices: attachment, ego, greed, lust, and rage. The 5 Ks. Sikhs are obligated to wear 5 articles of faith: kachera, undergarment; kanga, wooden comb; kara, metal bracelet; kesh, uncut hair; and kirpan, dagger, sword. Persecution and political awakening. The execution of the 5th Guru, Arjan Dev, under Emperor Jahangir for alleged rebellion, was a landmark moment, initiating a long struggle. Aurangzeb intensified this persecution, executing the 9th Guru Tegh Bahadur in 1675, which ignited a fierce Sikh rebellion. The public, brutal execution of Banda Singh Bahadur, rebellion leader, and 2,000 followers in Delhi, 1716, solidified the Sikh resolve never to submit to Mughal authority. Final collapse of the Mughals. Akbar's brilliant centralization became a vulnerability under mediocre successors. As central authority decayed and religious intolerance persisted, regional leaders asserted independence. In 1724, the Nizam of Hyderabad and the Awadh declared independence, carving off huge chunks of the empire. The Mughal decline was compounded by repeated foreign invasions. The Persian invasion of 1739 by Nader Shah saw the Mughals defeated despite a 6-1 advantage at the Battle of Karnal, leading to the brutal pillaging of Delhi. This was followed by the destructive sack of Delhi by the Durranis of Afghanistan in 1752. The rise of the Maratha Confederacy. With the Mughals on the ropes, the Marathas returned with vengeance. They rapidly expanded across India, from the Deccan between 1740 and 1761, capturing Orissa, launching raids into Bengal, and, most importantly, invading the Afghan-controlled puppet city of Delhi in 1757, capturing it in 2 weeks. The new Maratha power was structured as a confederacy rather than a centralized empire. Power was wielded from the center by a hereditary Peshwa, prime minister, but practical power was distributed among the 4 great Maratha noble families: Bhonsle, Gaikwad, Holkar, and Scindia, who effectively ruled their own pieces of the empire. This expansion halted in 1761 at the Third Battle of Panipat. The Maratha army, one of the largest forces of the 18th century, over 100,000 men, was decisively defeated by the Afghan Duranis, suffering 30,000 casualties, halting their expansion. The British take control. While Indian powers fought, the British EIC was slowly building its foundation. The company found great success in southern India, where the collapse of the Vijayanagara Empire created minor rulers eager for alliances, seeking protection from British ships and troops. For most of the 17th and early 18th centuries, the British were more concerned with trade and fending off Dutch and French rivals than territorial conquest, maintaining productive relations with the Mughals. However, the footholds established at Madras, Bombay, and Kolkata would eventually allow what had been a foot in the door for the EIC to become a boot on India's neck. Panbanban nai baugom su ket tuk, kwa thurki Mughal, su trowi dai kwa quien luk, chow ao, dagbiet laan, su subdo kwa kakung kwa bandi alone, Maratha, Mysore, Sikh. Va kau trao la, kok noide nam, 1857. Toi da tum tat fan nai sung kong huang 1,500 tan su, jiu lai kak chi tiet quan trong nyet, va tiep tuk fong kak kak tuat da tiet lap. The consolidation of British power, c. 1,000, 751,818. By the early 18th century, the British East India Company, EIC, had solidified its trade position, with Indian goods constituting about 1/7 of Britain's imports. The Europeans initially acted as a wild card, stepping into existing rivalries, offering wealth, arms, or alliances, rather than dominating Indian politics outright. The Carnatic Wars and the fall of the French. The EIC's main rival was the French East India Company, based in Pondicherry. Their competition led to 3 Carnatic Wars, which began as extensions of European conflicts, like the Austrian War of Succession and the 7 Years' War, but became increasingly interwoven with Indian politics. Second Carnatic War, 1749–1754. Britain and France backed rival candidates for the Nawab of the Carnatic. Britain ultimately prevailed. Third Carnatic War, 1756–1763. This war effectively ended French power in India. After a string of defeats, Chandanagar in 1757, Wandiwash in 1760, the British captured the French center at Pondicherry in 1761. Although the 1763 treaty returned Pondicherry, the French were forced to support British-backed client governments, leaving Britain unrivaled among European powers in India. The acquisition of Bengal and the Diwani. The EIC's military buildup at Fort William in Kolkata alarmed the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah. When the British refused to comply with his demands to halt the fortification, the Nawab attacked. Black Hole of Calcutta, 1756. After seizing the fort, approximately 60 captured British soldiers were confined overnight to a tiny unventilated prison space, 14 x 18 feet, resulting in the agonizing deaths of about 2/3 of them. Though likely unintentional, the news ignited British fury. Battle of Plassey, 1757. The EIC, led by Robert Clive, dispatched an army from Madras to confront Siraj's forces. The British had secretly dealt with Mir Jafar, one of Siraj's generals, who betrayed the Nawab by withdrawing his 50,000 troops at a critical moment. The British crushed the Bengal army, seizing control of Bengal. Siraj was captured and executed, marking the widely accepted start of British colonial rule in India. Battle of Buxar, 1764. The EIC later defeated a combined force of the deposed Mir Qasim, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, and the Nawab of Awadh. Treaty of Allahabad, 1765. The defeated Mughal emperor granted the EIC, the Diwani, the right to collect all taxes and revenues from Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This humiliating concession made the EIC the greatest military and financial power on the subcontinent, though Mughal authority was technically still recognized. Company rule and administrative reforms. With the Diwani, the EIC entered a new phase of company rule. The initial policy was to interfere as little as possible to maximize profit, adapting our regulations to the manners and understandings of the people. The Bengal famine, 1769, 1770. Monsoon failures led to widespread crop failure. Despite warnings, the company prioritized trade. Officials were unprepared when the famine struck in earnest. Modern scholarship suggests approximately 1 million deaths occurred, while company officials' primary concern was the interruption of trade revenue. Regulating Act 1773 and Cornwallis Code 1793, the British Parliament attempted to organize and curb company power. The Cornwallis Code, implemented by Governor-General Charles Cornwallis, famed for his surrender at Yorktown, aimed to tackle corruption by banning private trade among officials and purging the corrupt. Crucially, the code implemented a racist attitude that would define British rule. It banned Indians from holding higher offices in the company hierarchy, viewing them as inherently untrustworthy. Despite the ban on high office, Indians continued to serve as soldiers, known as sepoys, numbering over 100,000 by 1800. Conquest of the Great Indian Powers, 1767–1818. With the Mughals irrelevant and the French defeated, Britain systematically dismantled the remaining major Indian powers, Mysore, Hyderabad, and the Marathas. The Anglo-Mysore Wars. The Kingdom of Mysore, controlling the southwestern coast under Hyder Ali, was the first target. First War, 1767, 1769. The British, allied with the Marathas, were shocked when Mysore defeated their armies and forced the British to sign a protective treaty. The British immediately dishonored the treaty, leading to renewed conflict. Second War, 1784. Hyder Ali defeated the British handily, even using modified artillery with rocket-like projectiles. The tide turned with British victories and Hydar's death, ending with a peace treaty signed by his son, Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore. Fourth War, 1799. Tipu had secretly reached out to Napoleon, who was conquering Egypt, which the British deemed an intolerable threat. Company forces invaded, captured the capital at Seringapatam, killed Tipu Sultan in combat, and annexed his territory. Simultaneously, Britain compelled Hyderabad to become a protectorate, securing control of nearly all southern India. The Anglo-Maratha Wars. The Maratha Confederacy, the greatest Indian power, ruling most of western and northern India, was next. Internal disputes allowed the British to repeatedly interfere. Treaty of Bassein, 1802. The Maratha Peshwa, Bajirao II, entered into an alliance with the British for support in exchange for allowing British troops and a British advisor into his territories. This treaty was widely viewed by the Maratha nobility as the death knell of their empire. Second Anglo-Maratha War. 3 of the 4 leading Maratha clans, Bhonsle, Holkar, and Scindia, took up arms against the British and Baji Rao, but were defeated. The British acquired new territory like Haryana and secured a close alliance with the 4th clan, the Gaekwads. Third Anglo-Maratha War, 1817–1818. A dispute led to Baji Rao murdering a Gaekwad diplomat. The British issued harsh, unreasonable demands, handing over key forts, abolishing cavalry, which Baji Rao refused. He attacked a British army but was soundly defeated at the Battle of Khadki. The British systematically dismantled the Confederacy over the next 6 months. Baji Rao was exiled, and his lands were taken under British dominion. With the fall of the Marathas in 1818, Britain controlled almost all of India. Completing the map, annexation, and the Sikh Wars. The British spent the first half of the 19th century absorbing the remaining territories. Conquests and invasions. They took Nepal, 1816, fought the Anglo-Burmese Wars, acquiring Assam, waged the First Anglo-Afghan War, 1838, and annexed Sindh in a 5-week campaign in 1843, bringing the region under non-Muslim control for the first time in 1,000 years. Princely states, approximately 500 smaller rulers, seeing no hope of opposition, submitted to British authority, accepting protection and limits on their power in exchange for remaining on their thrones. These princely states comprised about 1/3 of British-controlled India. Doctrine of Lapse, 1848. The British implemented a policy to annex any Indian state that died without an adult male heir, which was used to absorb numerous states, including Satara, Jhansi, and Nagpur. They also annexed Awadh in 1856, citing internal corruption as justification. The Anglo-Sikh Wars. The last truly independent power was the Sikh Empire in the Punjab, founded by Ranjit Singh I, 1799–1839, who unified the Sikh republics. The Sikh Empire was religiously tolerant, employing people of many faiths and respecting Hindus, banning cow slaughter, while acting as a bulwark against Afghan invaders. First Anglo-Sikh War, 1845–1846. After Ranjit Singh's death, internal chaos and military buildup led to friction. The war lasted less than 3 months. The British dominated the battlefield, winning the decisive Battle of Sobran. 1846. The resulting Treaty of Lahore ceded vast territory to the British, installing the 5-year-old heir, Duleep Singh, with a British regent. Second, Anglo-Sikh War 1848–1849. Resentment led to a Sikh rebellion, which ended with a decisive British victory at the Battle of Gujarat. Duleep Singh was deposed and exiled to Britain, and the Sikh Empire's territories were fully absorbed. By 1849, Britain controlled virtually every inch of India. The Indian Rebellion of 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny. British rule was defined by a belief in the civilizing mission, imposing their own ideas and stamping out Indian traditions. Reforms. Some reforms were popular, like the Saudi regulation of 1829 banning widow burning and the Indian Slave Trade Act of 1843 banning slavery. Many Indians supported the laws but objected to the British being the ones to impose them. Alienation. The British insisted that civilization meant British ways. To gain economic and political power, Indians had to adopt English education, habits, and language. Technology. Steamships, telegraph, railroads primarily served the transport of goods and resources, not the average Indian. This created a profound sense of alienation and hostility toward rulers who showed little care or respect for Indian culture. The simmering hostility erupted in an inferno over an unlikely source: ammunition. The cartridge rumor. By 1857, the EIC employed 300,000 sepoy soldiers, both Hindu and Muslim. A rumor spread that the cartridges for the new standard-issue rifles, which soldiers had to bite into to use, were being greased with tallow from cows and pigs. Both Hinduism and Islam have strict prohibitions against consuming these animals. Many sepoys believe this was done intentionally to defile their beliefs. The uprising. Although the rumor was false, the EIC's suspension of cartridge production was seen as confirmation. On the 10th of May 1857, thousands of sepoys in Meerut rose up, massacring Europeans, and were quickly joined by civilians and the nobility. They marched to Delhi, where the exiled Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah II threw his support behind the rebels. Widespread fighting. Fighting erupted across India. In Kanpur, sepoys offered British residents safe passage, only to massacre them as they boarded boats. Only 7 people survived. The rebellion was widespread but far from universal. The vast majority of Indians and many sepoy units remained aloof or actively supported the British. This section covers the consolidation of the British Raj following the 1857 rebellion, the economic exploitation of India, the rise of the organized nationalist movement with the Indian National Congress, INC, the increasing Hindu-Muslim divide, the shift to mass mobilization with the Swadeshi movement, and the seismic impact of World War I and the Amritsar Massacre, culminating in the emergence of Mahatma Gandhi. I have summarized the text to approximately 1,500 words, maintaining all key historical details and statistics. The British Raj and economic exploitation, 1858–1900. The suppression of the 1857 rebellion resulted in horrific casualties, with some 800,000 Indians and British dying. The British exacted a bloody revenge, publicly executing Mughal princes and deporting the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah II, to Burma, formally dissolving the empire. The transfer of power. The rebellion served as the final nail in the coffin for the East India Company. In 1858, the British government took direct control of all Indian territories, ushering in the age of the British Raj. The Governor-General was renamed the Viceroy, and the Executive Council was expanded to include more Indians, though these bureaucratic changes meant little to the average citizen who remained voiceless. Economic backbone and infrastructure. Trade remained the Raj's highest priority. Agricultural exports. Agriculture was the economic backbone. Opium accounted for as much as 30% of Indian exports in the 1,860 seconds. Cotton and jute were major exports, with 20,000 people employed in jute mills in Bengal alone. Tea production grew massively, eclipsing China, with nearly 70,000 tons exported to Britain annually by 1900. These profits overwhelmingly benefited British merchants and traders. Railroads. Tens of millions of pounds were spent building railroads after 1857, but they primarily served to move goods and resources for export, not the general population. The life of an average Indian agricultural worker saw little change between 1,560 and 1,860. Racial isolation and social control. The British remained a tiny minority, never exceeding 100,000 people in India at any given point. They isolated themselves in walled-off districts, reflecting stark racial and gender attitudes. Sexual politics. Relationships between Indian men and British women were strictly prohibited. Liaisons between British men and Indian women, often soldiers and prostitutes, were officially discouraged but begrudgingly accepted. Over 60% of British soldiers reportedly contracted venereal diseases. Responsibility was laid solely on Indian women, viewed as innately unclean. The Contagious Diseases Act of 1868 punished Indian women for spreading disease, but exempted British men. The missionary influence. Christian missionaries established thousands of schools to teach literacy, but their goal was often to detach Indians from Hinduism and remake them into good Christians. Missionaries generally viewed Indian religion as misguided superstition and often treated Indians little better than children. Conversion statistics. While broad success was limited, a sizable number of Indians converted. Today, there are around 30 million Christians in India, barely 2% of the population, outnumbering Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs combined. A notable example is the Khasi people of Assam, over 80% of whom remained Christian following a Welsh-led mission that began in 1841. Seeds of nationalism and resistance. Indian elites, having acquired a Western-style education, began to wield liberal Western ideas against the British Raj. Repressive legislation. The Vernacular Press Act of 1878 was passed to censor criticism of British policies during the Second Anglo-Afghan War, prompting Indian critics to use Britain's own rhetoric of free speech against the law. Social reform opposition. British pushed social reforms, such as raising the marriage age for girls, often met opposition based on the principle that it was not Britain's place to rewrite Indian society. The Age of Consent Act of 1889, honor raising the age from 10 to 12, provoked massive riots in Bengal. Famines, plague, and disillusionment. Natural and health disasters fueled widespread disillusionment. Famines. Regional famines, including one in Bengal in the 1872, and severe food shortages across India in the 1890s, blamed on monsoon failures and overpopulation, resulted in the deaths of millions, with British authorities unable to respond effectively. Bubonic plague. The re-emergence of the bubonic plague in the late 19th century killed some 12 million Indians. The British-imposed quarantines earned immense resentment. The Indian National Congress, INC. In 1885, Indian intellectuals founded the Indian National Congress, INC, to create a forum for Indian voices. It aimed to allow Indians from every province and of every faith to voice their views directly to the British. Growth. Starting with 73 founding delegates in 1885, it grew to 2,000 delegates in just 4 years, becoming a formidable expression of Indian autonomy. Concessions. By 1892, the British conceded to some INC demands, expanding access to civil service examinations and opening some local council positions to elections. The Hindu-Muslim divide. The most troublesome division was the relationship between Hindus and Muslims, a rift that the British unintentionally widened. British policy. Britain established separate systems of justice and different laws for Hindus and Muslims, creating a legal barrier that encouraged division. Furthermore, the British often showed more sympathy toward Muslims and granted them preferential treatment in the army and civil service positions. Violence and cow protection. Hindu-Muslim violence became common in the late 19th century. The cow protection movement, demanding an end to cow slaughter, a practice integral to Muslim life, emerged in the 1872. This conflict led to deadly violence. In 1893 alone, approximately 100 people were killed in violence over cow killing in the Punjab, with several hundred more dying and rioting in Bombay. Congress split. Despite initial Muslim participation, the inherent conflicts of interest caused Muslims to quickly abandon the INC, which lost half of its original Muslim membership within 8 years of its founding. Mass mobilization. The Swadeshi movement. The need to mobilize the masses was met by the Bengal Partition Plan of 1905. The plan. Britain proposed partitioning Bengal with almost 80 million people, merging Muslim East Bengal with Assam and Hindu West Bengal with Bihar and Orissa. The British justified this as an attempt to make governance easier. The reaction. Most Muslims welcomed the plan, but Hindus in Congress saw it as an attack on Hindu autonomy and a classic example of divide and rule. The opposition movement spread rapidly. Spearheaded by the figures Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Bipin Chandra Pal, known as Lal, Bal, and Pal. The movement implemented a policy of economic non-cooperation known as Swadeshi, urging Indians to stop buying British foreign goods and buy Indian products instead. This hit the British economy hard, resulting in a 25% decrease in imports by 1908. Withdrawal. Despite the deportation of leaders like Tilak and Pal, resistance continued until 1912, when the British were forced to withdraw the original plan. The Bengal Partition was a major turning point, proving that a mass movement could effectively pressure British power. However, the divisions were stark. In 1906, the All India Muslim League was founded as a Muslim alternative to Congress, signaling the seemingly irreconcilable rift over India's future. World War I and the Road to Gandhi, 1914–1922. The War and Disillusionment. India provided immense support during World War I, with some 1.5 million Indians serving in the military and over 60,000 dying in the fighting. Gurdat Singh received the Victoria Cross for heroism in Belgium. Post-war sentiment, wartime hardship, rising taxes and prices led Indians to question why they were fighting for freedom when they were denied it at home. The Lucknow Agreement, 1916. Dissatisfaction led the INC and the Muslim League to sign this joint agreement, demanding expanded democratic rights and judicial independence. The devastating Spanish flu outbreak immediately after the war killed approximately 14 million Indians, about 5% of the population, compounding the suffering. The Amritsar Massacre. Post-war calls for reform were met with disappointment, especially with the passage of the Rowlatt Act, 1919, which extended wartime powers to try political cases without a jury. The massacre. On the 13th of April 1919, thousands of people gathered in the Jallianwala Bagh Garden in Amritsar to celebrate the Baisakhi festival, defying a British ban. Brigadier General Reginald Dyer and his troops marched into the plaza, blocked the only exit, and ordered his men to open fire without warning for 10 minutes. Casualties. At least 379 people were officially recorded as killed. Some estimates go as high as 1,500. Turning point. News of the ruthless intentional massacre horrified people across India and Britain. Winston Churchill called it monstrous. It became a turning point for the independence movement, solidifying mass support for Congress's demand to end British rule. The emergence of Mahatma Gandhi. The post-Amritsar chaos brought the struggle a national leader, Mahatma Gandhi. South Africa. Born in 1869, Gandhi studied law in London before spending 22 years in South Africa, 1893–1915, where he witnessed racial injustice firsthand and developed his philosophy. Gandhi championed satyagraha, truth force, a tactic of nonviolent resistance that absolutely prohibited violence and called for non-cooperation with oppressive policies, while treating opponents with respect. Leadership. Returning to India in 1915, Gandhi quickly gained a massive following and was swept into the leadership of the INC in the wake of the massacre. He pushed the INC toward a firmly pro-independence direction. In 1922, the British, angered by his influence, arrested Gandhi and dozens of other INC leaders, sentencing him to 6 years in prison. His arrest, however, did not halt the momentum, as calls for independence intensified and the British imprisoned 30,000 protesters by the end of 1921 alone. Following his release from prison, Gandhi found the independence movement bitterly split and disheartened. He temporarily stepped away from the political arena to focus on anti-poverty work. In his absence, the British were forced to grant further concessions, while the demand for full independence solidified. The path to independence and World War II, 1921, 1945. Pre-war political development. Despite Gandhi's withdrawal, the movement secured several victories. Concessions, 1921. India gained a bicameral elected parliament and greater financial control through a tariff board. The requirement for Indians to travel to England for civil service exams was finally ended. Simon Commission, 1928. The British-appointed commission, which contained no Indians, was boycotted by both the INC and the Muslim League. Congress responded by setting up its own commission, demanding self-governance with Commonwealth status. Call for full independence, 1929. The election of Jawaharlal Nehru as the new INC leader marked a pivotal shift. On the 19th of December, 1929, Congress issued a call for nothing less than full independence, Purna Swaraj. Vision for Pakistan, 1933. The concept of a separate Muslim state became formalized when a pamphlet circulated in London first used the term Pakistan, advocating for a sovereign nation uniting the Muslim-majority regions Punjab, Afghan, Kashmir, Sindh, and Baluchistan. Government of India, Act 1935. More reforms established representative provincial governments with separate Hindu and Muslim electorates, but Congress's landslide victory confirmed that only full independence would suffice. The Salt March and Economic Depression. The Great Depression hit India hard. The collapse of the global export economy caused grain production to plummet, and India was forced to import food. Crucially, the lack of foreign investment allowed wealthy Indian investors, many of whom supported Congress, to invest in domestic industries like textiles, funneling new wealth into the opposition. Salt tax. The British exacerbated poverty by imposing a salt tax, requiring Indians to pay exorbitant fees even for extracting salt by boiling seawater. The Salt March, 1930. Gandhi returned to lead a national protest against the tax. For 24 days, he and supporters undertook a peaceful 240-mile walk from Sabarmati to Dandi on the Gujarat coast. Upon reaching the sea, Gandhi symbolically scooped up a pile of mud and salt, declaring, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." Response. The simple act inspired millions across India. The British responded forcefully, arresting some 60,000 people associated with the Salt March and the wider non-cooperation movement. World War II and the final push for freedom. 1939–1947. India's war contribution and internal conflict. India was unilaterally declared involved in World War II by the British government. Military service. Some 1.4 million Indians served, forming the backbone of British forces in theaters from North Africa to Burma. Indian troops fought desperately in defenses of Hong Kong and Singapore. Gurdad Khan became the first Indian to receive the Victoria Cross in October 1914. Domestic tension. Congress supported the Allied cause but demanded concessions, which the British refused. In October 1939, the British used wartime powers to force Congress representatives to resign. Quit India Movement, 1942. Gandhi led a call for non-violent resistance, launching the Quit India Movement. The British responded by arresting Gandhi, the entire Congress leadership, and some 90,000 supporters. Subhas Chandra Bose and the Indian National Army, INA. A minority faction sought independence by aligning with the Axis powers. Subhas Chandra Bose, a complicated nationalist figure, believed that Indian independence could be achieved through a British defeat by the Axis. Axis alliance. Bose initially aligned with Germany, even forming the Tiger Legion within the SS. In 1943, he traveled to Southeast Asia and allied with the Japanese, recruiting Indian prisoners of war into the Indian National Army, INA. Operation Yugo. In March 1944, the INA collaborated with the Japanese to invade India. The Indian populace did not rise to support them as Bose hoped. Indian and British troops mounted a fierce defense, winning hard-fought victories at the battles of Kohima and Imphal, which ended Japan's expansion in Southeast Asia. The Bengal famine of 1943. The war precipitated a severe crisis. Japanese control of Southeast Asia, especially Burma, cut off vital food imports. Failure of non-intervention. While the British adopted an interventionist approach, rationing, cracking down on hoarding across most of India, the government in Bengal adopted a non-interventionist approach, hoping the problem would self-resolve. This strategy was a colossal failure. Casualties. By the time the British Viceroy deployed troops to distribute grain, an estimated 1 million people had starved to death in Bengal. Criticism. Critics charged the British with neglect, while defenders argued that shipping capacity was severely limited by Japanese dominance and the danger of U-boat attacks. Though this inability to meet the challenge further fueled the independence demand. The inevitable partition. The war destroyed Britain's capacity and desire to hold an empire. In post-war elections, Congress swept over 90% of the non-Muslim seats, and the Muslim League took a similar 90% share of the Muslim seats, demonstrating overwhelming demand for self-rule but deep communal division. Withdrawal announced. 1947. In February 1947, the British announced their intention to leave, setting a provisional date for August 1947. The two-nation reality. Despite Gandhi's plea for a unified India, partition between Hindu and Muslim areas was the only viable option. On the 2nd of June 1947, a plan was agreed upon to create two nations. India, the Hindu-majority areas, comprising most of the subcontinent. Pakistan, two awkward, non-contiguous Muslim areas. West Pakistan, Sindh, Punjab, Balochistan, NW Frontier Province, and East Pakistan, Muslim-majority areas of Bengal. Final borders. The final borders, drawn by Cyril Radcliffe, were not agreed upon until the first week of August, and were not formally announced until the morning of Wednesday, the 14th of August 1947, the day Pakistan declared independence. Independence, violence, and Nehru's India. 1947-1950 seconds. Birth of two nations. Shortly before midnight, on the 14th of August 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru addressed the nation. As midnight passed, the 15th of August 1947 ushered in independence for India. The partition mass migration. The rushed and imprecise nature of partition led to one of the largest mass migrations in history, with about 15 million people moving across the newly drawn borders. Crisis. The governments of India and Pakistan were unprepared. Lack of government support, food, and water led to hundreds of thousands of deaths from disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Violence. Tensions erupted into widespread communal violence. Migrant convoys were attacked, and mob killings were rampant. Examples include the massacre of some 3,000 Muslims by a Sikh mob in Amritsar in September 1947, and the massacre of some 1,500 Hindus and Sikhs by a Muslim mob in Gujarat, Pakistan, in January 1948. Demographics. The scale of the shift is stark. Indian-controlled Punjab was 30% Muslim in 1931, but less than 2% in 1951. Pakistani-controlled Punjab was 22% Hindu, Sikh in 1931, but just 0.16% in 1951. Death toll. Overall, it is estimated that over 1 million died as a result of the migrations and related violence. The First Kashmir War. The princely state of Jammu and Kashmir posed a critical problem. Its Hindu Maharaja, Hari Singh, delayed joining either nation. Rebellion and intervention. A Muslim rebellion in Poonch, seeking to join Pakistan, escalated until Pakistani troops intervened in October 1947. Singh turned to India for military support, agreeing to accede to India in exchange. India immediately sent troops to repel the Pakistanis. Line of control 1949. The fighting, mostly skirmishes, stabilized in 1948. The UN brokered a ceasefire effective the 1st of January 1949, establishing a temporary border called the Line of Control, LOC, leaving about 2/3 of Kashmir in Indian hands and 1/3 in Pakistani hands. A planned referendum never occurred, making the LOC the de facto permanent border. The conflict set a bitter tone for India-Pakistan relations. The assassination of Gandhi. Gandhi, who continued to work for Hindu-Muslim unity after independence, was assassinated in Delhi on the 30th of January 1948 by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who believed Gandhi was betraying Hindus. His death was a brutal blow to the new nation, but it could not overshadow the dawn of independence. The Nehruvian Vision. India's new constitution came into force on the 26th of January 1950, establishing the national vision. Democracy. India was founded as a democracy with universal voting rights, over 21. Nehru's Congress Party won the first elections in a landslide. Secularism. Given India's religious diversity, the government was to be secular, guaranteeing equal protection and rights to all faiths. Language and identity. While Hindi was predominant, other major languages, like Bengali, Tamil, Marathi, were protected. The initial division of states was heavily informed by linguistic differences. Affirmative action. The legal category of untouchable, scheduled caste, was abolished, and reservations were set aside for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, adivasis, in areas ranging from university places to legislative seats to address historical discrimination. Economic and social policy. Nehru, serving as prime minister, favored a socialist approach, utilizing 5-year plans for state-directed investment and some nationalization. Growth. Nehru's moderate economic approach led to strong growth and recovery. By 1965, India had the 7th highest industrial output in the world. Social reforms. His term saw expanded minority and women's rights, including the end of caste restrictions on marriage, a raised minimum marriage age, and expanded women's inheritance rights. Education improved markedly, notably with the establishment of the Indian Institutes of Technology in the 1952nd and 72nd. Foreign policy. India became a pillar of the global non-aligned movement, maintaining a careful neutrality between the socialist USSR, toward which Nehru leaned economically, and the West. This neutrality, however, did not prevent disputes, such as rising tensions with Portugal in 1961. Nehru's foreign policy and the rise of Indira Gandhi, 1961–1977. Nehru's commitment to non-alignment was severely tested by regional conflicts. Annexation of Goa, 1961. After diplomatic efforts failed, India launched Operation Vijay in December 1961 to forcibly retake Goa from Portugal, which had controlled it since the 16th century. The 2 days of fighting resulted in 50 deaths before India annexed the territory. The move was heavily criticized in the West as unnecessarily aggressive, compromising India's neutrality. Sino-Indian War, 1962. Tensions with Communist China escalated after India granted sanctuary to the Dalai Lama, following the 1959 Tibetan Uprising. Border disputes over the Aksai Chin and Arunachal Pradesh regions boiled over into a war that lasted a month and claimed 2,000 lives, mostly Indian. China seized most of the disputed territory, handing India a clear defeat. Succession. Nehru died in 1964. After the brief 2-year term of Lal Bahadur Shastri, who also died suddenly, Nehru's daughter, Indira Gandhi, no relation to Mahatma Gandhi, took office in 1966, symbolizing the dominance of the Nehru-Gandhi political dynasty. Indira Gandhi's divisive rule. Indira Gandhi proved to be a powerful, talented, but divisive leader, accused of nepotism and dictatorial tendencies. Achievements. She presided over the Green Revolution, which modernized Indian agriculture, and in 1974, she made India the world's 6th nuclear state. Bangladesh Liberation War, 1971. Her most famous act was intervening in the war for independence in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, where the Urdu-majority West Pakistan was accused of widespread violence and genocide against Bengalis. On the 3rd of December 1971, Pakistan launched military strikes against India. India responded with a lightning campaign of air and naval strikes, sending troops to aid the rebels. By December 17, Pakistan was defeated and forced to submit to a ceasefire, ending the Third Indo-Pakistani War and securing Bangladesh's independence. The emergency 1975–1977. Following allegations of corruption and her conviction for election manipulation in 1975, Indira Gandhi defied the court order to leave office and declared a state of emergency. This move effectively made her a dictator for almost 2 years, during which he imposed sweeping censorship and purged opponents. Public support eventually eroded due to the emergency rule and economic issues like inflation, and she and Congress were swept out of office by the Janata Party in the 1977 elections. The end of the dynasty and economic liberalization, 1977–1991, the Janata Party government collapsed in July 1979 due to internal rivalries. When new elections were held in January 1980, Indians returned to Indira Gandhi. Operation Blue Star, 1984. The death knell for her rule was the rising Sikh separatist movement, calling for an independent state in the Punjab. Believing on what are now understood to be false allegations that separatists were preparing a rebellion, Indira launched Operation Blue Star in 1984. She sent troops and tanks against the revered Golden Temple in Amritsar, one of Sikhism's holiest sites. The ensuing week-long battle resulted in hundreds of deaths on both sides and outraged Sikhs worldwide. Assassination. On the 31st of October 1984, two of her Sikh bodyguards assassinated her in her garden. Her death provoked widespread anti-Sikh violence and riots, killing hundreds. Rajiv Gandhi. Her son, Rajiv Gandhi, was immediately ushered into power. He presided over economic renewal and regional insurgencies. The decision to send troops to Sri Lanka, 1987–1990, to quell the Tamil Tigers' insurgency, fearing it would inspire Tamil separatism in India, ultimately led to his downfall. Assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv was voted out of office in 1989. On the 21st of May 1991, while campaigning, he was assassinated by a Tamil Tiger suicide bomber. His death brought an end to the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty, which had led India for 40 of its 44 years of independence. Economic transformation, 1982–2000. Despite political turmoil, India rapidly modernized in the 1980 seconds through the import of technology like televisions and computers. Agricultural technology and fertilizer effectively banished the centuries-old threat of famine. Economic liberalization, 1991. An imbalance of trade reached a crisis point in 1991, forcing a major economic readjustment. India opened itself to more foreign investment, scaled back regulations, and reduced government control. Growth. Per capita GDP rose sharply, increasing almost 50% between 1990 and 2000. Continuing a rapid, steady ascent after the turn of the millennium. Political diversity. Congress lost its traditional dominance as new parties, particularly the nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, emerged. India experienced a period of shifting coalition governments until 2014. Kargil War, 1999. Relations with Pakistan remain difficult. The two nations fought their fourth war, the Kargil War, after Pakistani soldiers crossed the line of control in Kashmir. The stakes were higher since Pakistan had acquired nuclear weapons in 1974. After 12 weeks of fighting and between 1,000 and 4,000 deaths across both sides, India emerged victorious. India, in the 21st century, 2000, present. Natural disasters and security threats. India entered the new millennium strong, becoming the world's most populous nation in March 2024. Disasters. India faced deadly natural disasters, including the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, which killed an estimated 16,000 people in southeast India, and the 2001 Gujarat earthquake, claiming 20,000 lives. Terrorism. India has been on the front line of the war on terror. Mumbai suffered especially hard. A 2006 train bombing killed 200 people, and a 2008 mass shooting killed 175 people. The government also contends with homegrown insurgencies, such as the Naxalite Maoist communists. Economic resilience and technological success. 2008 recession. India weathered the 2008 global recession better than most, thanks to close trade with China and less risky lending practices by Indian banks, leading to only a brief disruption in its steady growth trajectory. Technology. Indian universities are highly productive in science, technology, and engineering graduates who have high international representation. India's space program is notable, successfully putting a probe in orbit around Mars, 2013, and achieving its first successful landing on the Moon, 2023. The Modi era and the future. In 2014, Narendra Modi and his BJP formed the first non-coalition government in 30 years, ushering in a new chapter defined by strong leadership and Hindu nationalism. Economy. Modi embraces a globalist economic perspective. India's continued rise saw it overtake the UK in 2022 to become the world's fifth largest economy. Social policy. Modi has revived the Hindutva nationalist ideology, emphasizing India's Hindu heritage. While celebrated by supporters, this ideology is criticized for marginalizing the country's Muslim, Sikh, and other religious minorities. Ayodhya Temple. The inauguration of the temple to Ram in Ayodhya in January 2024 built on the site of the Babri Masjid Mosque, which was destroyed by Hindu radicals in 1992, symbolized the fusion of faith and political power, yet also highlighted the deep religious divisions that have plagued Indian history. With India now the world's most populous nation, analysts predict it may become a superpower on par with China or the US by the end of the century. Its challenges, logistics, poverty, and managing deep domestic and foreign divisions are immense, but it is more unified, wealthy, and powerful today than ever before. And that brings us to the end of today's immersive journey through history and language. If these stories resonated with you, remember this: English is more than just a language. It's a living museum. Every new word you master, every sentence you form, helps keep the echoes of these pivotal moments alive. So, continue to listen intently, feel the power of the narratives, and discover the world through the lens of history and English. Thank you for being a dedicated member of the MC Time Trackers community. Before you go, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell, because next time, we'll journey even deeper into the past, unlocking more stories and expanding your vocabulary. Until then, take care, keep learning, and never stop exploring the epic story of humanity.